Welcome into our season finale wrap-up of Inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak. He's fresh out the locker room after a probably somber day over at the facility, just wrapping things up after another loss, a lot of uncertainty, and just, fourth straight year, no playoffs for the Black and Gold. Jeff, how was your time in Tampa?
It was fine. It's funny. This somberness tends to be gone by the time you get into the locker room for this type of thing. Right now, when you're talking 2018 and the NFC Championship and all that, the post-loss locker room is a dark place, right? It's an angry place. In this case, like a lot of that emotion has gotten out by the time you get on the plane, and especially in this case, because it's been over for 3 weeks. Like it's really just kind of almost like a graduation more so than anything else at this point. And so it's kind of what we're going to talk about. Darren Rizzi talked for 45 minutes today. We can get into some of that, but I do want to, I haven't even gotten to go through all of it yet. We heard from Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Cam Jordan again. I feel like Cam Jordan's had like 5 20-minute interviews in the last 2 weeks alone. So what else does he have to say? But there's a lot of that I still have to dive into. Literally just happened. That's why we're doing this later in the day than normal, because the open locker room session was in the morning. Normally we would want to record a podcast around that time, but I did want to be there for that. So the next episode is when I think we'll dive into a lot of that, a lot of the true kind of off-season content. What's the plan? Who are the coaching candidates? We did get a few names today, so we can just hit those right now. Which is the Saints have apparently requested interviews with Bills offense coordinator Joe Brady, Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, and then David Shaw, Broncos personnel executive. Obviously connections with Sean Payton, former Stanford head coach. They're going to interview Darren Rizzi at some point. So we'll get into that as we go, as we get kind of a fuller list. Don't really want to do that today because it's all kind of fresh. And I did. So this first segment, I kind of want to talk about the game, what happened on Sunday, what are our takeaways from that, just general kind of consensus on how we feel things went. What's the kind of post-mortem on that? Second segment, I have the list of expiring contracts. So I think that would be a good thing to get into today. Is kind of like, okay, who's coming back? Who do you think the Saints should bring back? Yes, no, TBD, that sort of thing. We'll go through the offense and defense. That'll be the second segment. Final segment will be a mailbag, as always in these post-game episodes. It doesn't have to be about the game. Obviously, we can talk about coaching search. We can talk about Rizzi. We can talk about what went wrong this season, what has to change, whether they should completely blow up and clean house. I did ask Darren about that today, just that idea, and I thought he had a good answer. And it's just kind of like, if you're Darren and you're trying to sell yourself in this role, it's got to be tough, because like he's up there saying, hey, we need to make changes. We need to make a lot of changes. But then hiring Darren would be in and of itself not making a change. So it's kind of a tough thing to navigate. But either way, let's just get into this game. Saints dominated, in my opinion, the first half of that game. The Bucs fans were booing at least 4 different times in the first half of that game. They were very restless. They had to be like seeing their life flash before their eyes for a bit there, because we talked about this. It's kind of been a house of horrors for the Bucs against the Saints in that building. And it really, really looked for a moment there like, hey, this is happening again. Now, we've seen this, as Bobby put it, the same old song and dance. Like solid first half, second half, he fell off a cliff, and that's what happened. I think Spencer Rattler continues to show like glimpses of a guy who could be a guy, but he's not a guy right now. Inaccuracy in big moments. He leaves the ball high too much. I think he's a little late on some throws. Stuff that as a rookie, you're not going to be like, wow, that's it. That's disqualifying. But it is kind of like, okay, these are trends and you have to fix them. Either way, the best case scenario for the Saints actually came true in that they did move up a spot in the draft order. So losing actually did benefit them. The Bears lost, so the Saints are going to pick 9th overall. I'm sorry, the Bears won, so the Saints are going to pick 9th overall. They moved up 1 spot. If the Saints had beaten the Bucs, they would not have moved up. So losing did benefit them in that way. But we're on to the offseason. There's no more trying to sell this product. It was an ugly product. It was an ugly season. And now you're just going to kind of pick up the pieces and see where everything stands.
Yeah, that game in Tampa, the biggest disappointment is right at the end, too. You let Mike Evans get the record, to get the 1,000 yards in the year. And I know Rizzi talked about it. And to me, that the explanation I thought was horrible.
Well, I mean, I think at that point, they did want to call a coverage that put two guys on him at the line and didn't allow him to get off. But then I think that it got miscommunicated in the sense that you're not typically calling a defense in that situation. You're kind of just going out there and being like, all right, whatever. And I don't think anyone, I just think it was just kind of that moment. Everyone was like, okay,
whatever.
I would have tackled him. I would have just gone out there and just straight up tackled him. Like, keep doing it. Keep doing it. You're going to try. We're not going to let you. We're going to be bad sports about this. Because, like, hey, unwritten rules, unwritten whatever. I'm not allowing a team to do that to me. It is funny because, you look at it and you say, like, oh, the difference.
Jeff, you froze on me.
Did I freeze? It's because people keep texting me, but like, what is, like, go back to last year, the Saints are running or a touchdown out of the victory formation. I put that in the same category.
Yeah, right.
The only difference is the Bucs didn't line up in the victory formation to do it. But I don't know. Like, I guess you get your record, you do whatever. That's so, I don't know. I just can't help but feel like if I'm Mike Evans, I feel like that's cheap. Like if I'm Jerry Rice, I'm like, I didn't do it that way, But either way, no one's going to look at that record.
When we talk about it, though, down the line, no one will probably remember that. And they'll be like, oh, he's amongst the greats like Jerry Rice.
Exactly. When he gets into a Hall of Fame ballot,
right?
People aren't going to be talking about, well, one of those seasons he had like 1,001 yards. And one of those seasons he had like 1,004. And he had to do it at the end of a game that was already decided in week 18. No, they're just going to be talking about, okay, he's on the same line as Jerry Rice. So, it is what it is. But yeah, Darren he kind of just like shook his head when that happened. And I think it's kind of like one last, like, okay, Joe, how's this defense been working for you? Can't even get that call right at the end of a game.
He's like, oh, he noticed they weren't lined up right and wanted to call a timeout because they were supposed to be in double coverage. And I was like, come on.
Well, I mean, I think he's annoyed that it happened too, but he doesn't get to call the defense. So, I think that's just like kind of one final like backhanded comment about Joe Woods on Joe Woods' way out the door because it hasn't gone well with Joe Woods. Like, let's just be real. At what point late in the game on that long drive that the Saints had a shot there. They had the Bucs backed up in their own territory. Just like, okay, you get them to punt deep in their own territory. All you need is a field goal. You're only down 1 point there. And not only do they get out of the shadow of their own goalposts, they drive the length of the field and score a touchdown. At one point, I just saw Joe Woods kind of just like go like this and like his head in his hands for like a solid 20 seconds, just like shaking his head. And I'm like, yeah, I think we're all right there with you, Joe. There's stupid penalties. They were just bad play. If I didn't know any better, I think the Saints were tanking. I did know better because they were not tanking. Like they were trying to win that game. There was no like, wow, we don't need this. You just lost your composure, and that's just indicative of how that defense has operated over this last 4 or 5 games, because that's what it's been.
Then you talked about too with the tale of two halves. Obviously, that's been the theme of late. But man, I was so happy. You mentioned that first half that they were playing a lot better, and for whatever reason in the second half they just got away from Juwan Johnson, who I thought was having a hell of a game.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't sustain any offense in the second half. I mean, like they just didn't. I mean, I don't know how many first downs they had, but I mean, they're one scoring drive, right? They didn't get shut out in the second half, but they also basically did get shut out in the second half because their 3 points that they got in the second half came immediately after a Jordan Howden interception in plus territory. I think they moved the ball 4 yards off of that possession, kicked a field goal, and that was it. They got another turnover effectively in Bucs territory and did nothing with it. They went backwards. So it's like, hey, you are where you are, and you're an offense that doesn't have answers when defenses start to figure you out. That's what you are. And it's tough because I want to say, I see, Kubiak doesn't make the adjustments, doesn't do whatever. I don't know. What adjustments do you have? Like, you don't have weapons on offense to adjust with. You can do what you do, you run your stuff, and then it's like, okay, at a certain point, one guy has to make a play, and you don't have the guys that are going to make plays. Like, you don't have, Cedric Wilson isn't a guy who's going to have a spectacular one-on-one effort and win a play for you. You don't have those star players that you can rely on when push comes to shove. And that's just been the story of this season. Now, that's not the excuse for the defense. That's why I'm going to be a lot harder on the defense than I am ever going to be on the offense. Because, other than Paulson and Debo, you pretty much got your defense out there. Now, you were without Pete Werner and Willie Gay in this game. I thought Nephi Sewell played fine.
Yeah, he was good.
I just think the defense is in shambles, and in a way that does not make sense. In a way that it's like you don't have an identity on defense anymore. And to me, that's the biggest thing that I need to address this offseason is like, what is my defensive identity going to be? Because right now, like, I don't think it's a matter of not having talent. I think that's the easy explanation for why things went the way they did this year. I don't think it's all that. I really don't. I think a lot of it is the leadership on the defensive side of the ball. And it wasn't great to begin the season, but it got a lot worse after you fired Dennis Allen and went with Joe Woods. And it just, you turned into a group that was just waiting to lose. Like you had no, like, there was a couple games there where the pass rush really got going, and that helped you, especially against the Commanders and the Giants. But otherwise, it's just, there's no teeth to this defense anymore.
But if you listen to Cam Jordan, he's happy in the second half of the year when he got used more at defensive end.
No, I think Cam actually, I think, has played well over the second half of this season. Like, if he'd be the first to tell you that, like, him riding the bench was not helpful for this team. And they weren't a good defense in the first half of the season either. Let's be real. This has not been a good defense, but I at least understood what their plan was. I understood what they were trying to do. In the second half of the season, the plan seemed to be like, let's not like ruffle any feathers. Let's not make anyone mad. Let's get the veteran players on the field and let them do what they do. And we're going to figure stuff out with some of these younger players. But no, it just wasn't pretty. And in that game, like, they're the type of team that when things are going well, like when you're winning a game, it makes sense and it looks good. And then when things start to go poorly, you just don't have anyone that can be that X factor and make plays in big moments. And that's going to kind of lead into like, okay, okay, we have expiring contracts. Who gets brought back? Because I don't know, like, you see a lot of teams go out there and you watch the Lions play, right? They don't have anybody on defense anymore, at least not the players. They have like Brian Branch, and even Terrion Arnold got hurt yesterday. Who knows when he's coming back? And they lost Aiden Hutchinson, and they lost all these guys, but they're still out there competing. And they seem to have an identity and a plan, and they're executing it.
They can stop the run a lot better.
They just execute what they want to do. Like, that's, to me, that is the difference between a lot of defenses, like a good defense and a bad defense. Talent is important, obviously, but having a plan and executing it is more important. And the Saints, I feel like, don't have a plan.
The run defense used to be a hallmark, like, they were a stout front, and it's amazing how much it's deteriorated in like 2 years. I haven't seen it this bad, and I don't know how long. The run defense, obviously, the passing defense. I remember those Greenbrier years; it was kind of brutal, but right now it just seems like handoff to whoever, and you're getting 4 or 5 yards every single time.
Nah, see, I don't agree with that. I heard Bobby talking about that after the game. That's really not what that game was. Bucky Irving had a 25-yard run. That's where that 4.7 comes from. Sean Tucker had a 14-yard run. That's where that comes from. But in general, I actually thought that they managed the run reasonably well. It was Baker's scrambles that were the run game.
That's part of it, though. With the QB yardage, it's been killer too.
It is, but those are two different things. I know Bobby said that, but that doesn't make sense. Like, QB scrambles and run defense are two very different things. Now, you have to figure both of them out, but stopping a traditional run play and stopping Baker from stepping up through the line against the pass rush are two very different things. And we can't pretend that, like, oh, well, if they allow 60 yards to the quarterback on things that are not QB runs, that is on the run defense. No, that's on the pass rush. So that doesn't make sense to me. Like, you do separate. The one time this Bucs actually tried to run the ball with Baker it went terribly. It was
Oh,
like
yeah.
a second down QB sweep that they lost like 5 yards on. So I don't know. Like, to me, the run defense wasn't the issue in that game. The issue was, and Bobby's right on this, is when Baker wanted to run, when his first read wasn't there and he looked up, he saw just gaping holes that he would step up into over. And like, that's a problem that I don't even know. It's not about the run defense. It's about gap discipline and lane discipline in your pass rush. So that's where I had the biggest issue. I actually didn't think the run defense was a problem in that game. And
But you take
like,
out Baker and you're still averaging over 4.5 yards a carry, probably giving
yeah,
up.
it's close, but I mean, it's mainly because of a couple long runs. Not, yeah, I didn't think you had a ton of like 7-8 yard runs. You had 2 to 3 yard runs, and then you had like 20-yard runs. But either way, it wasn't good. I don't think that the like interior run defense was the issue in that game, because you got the Bucs into third and medium, third and long constantly, especially in the first half. And they actually got off the field in the first half. In the second half, it seemed like every time you got the Bucs into third and medium, third and long, Baker would extend. He would either run or he would find somebody. Mike Evans was making every catch. You know, and that's the funny thing. It's like, I can gripe about Mike Evans getting that cheap catch at the end. He was making some really nice catches throughout the course of that game. It just was not a particularly dynamic game from a yardage perspective overall. Like, there just wasn't a ton of yardage to be had for anybody. No one went over 100 yards in that game. Baker only threw for 220. Like, he didn't have a massive game either, but he made the plays down the stretch when he needed to make them. Spencer Rattler actually threw for more yards than Baker Mayfield in that game. Saints only ran for, like what, 60 yards total, 64 yards. Clyde
That was
led the
another
way.
disappointment. Unfortunately, the run game just wasn't existent.
It's never going to be existent if you don't have Alvin. Like, that's just going to be the case.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. I actually thought Clyde played reasonably well. We're not doing like the traditional 3 up, 3 down, but I don't think Clyde was the issue. He actually had a couple really nice runs in there. He had a 12-yard run. I expect that he's going to come back. He's actually not even on the list of expiring contracts because I didn't put practice squad guys on there, but I would expect him to come back. I would expect the Saints to kind of give him a shot in training camp, and maybe he can, like, I think this is in a situation where, next year with Kendre Miller, this year I feel like he was kind of guaranteed a roster spot to some extent because he's in his second year and you're just going to kind of give him a chance. Next year, I don't feel that way. Next year, I feel like as a third year player, you got to earn that roster spot. And who's to say he can do that? I think if this is the year that if you spend your entire training camp on IR, you're not getting into the regular season. You're going onto the street. So we'll see how that goes. But the last 2 weeks, if I had to pick like one, like, okay, this is a nice thing that happened, I think Clyde's looked good. I think he's looked like a player that can contribute. So, beggars can't be choosers in that situation, right?
Yeah, my high for the end of the year was seeing Nephi back in action. I thought he had a good game and came back to in a place where he got injured and it took away his season, making that bounce back and was up there all over the place, really making in the stat, racking up some stats on tackles for loss. It was just a guy has worked hard to get back where he is right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion in that game for a lot of players for a lot of different reasons. And for him, that was obviously, a big emotional game to come back. And that's a tough injury to work back from. I don't think people necessarily, anyone who hasn't had to deal with those injuries, and I haven't had to deal with a major reconstructive knee, but like the amount of work that goes into getting back from those injuries is incredible. And, people take for granted, he tore his ACL, he's going to be back in X number of months. That's not true. Like, in a lot of instances, you're never the same player again when you have a knee injury like that. And so, like, that's a ton of work, a ton of effort. He was their Ed Block winner, for a reason. And so, yeah, it's cool to see a guy get back on the field like that. It's also a bummer when you see a guy who is kind of your emotional leader, have one of the dumbest penalties you'll ever see and on the sideline.
Man.
In a moment that I felt like the Saints were kind of still in control of that game. They got a 7-yard gain on first down, and Foster Moreau, I didn't even ever see a replay of it. I don't know how egregious it necessarily was, but he threw a ball at a guy on the sideline. He got a 15-yard penalty instead of 2nd and 3. It's
Did we ever find out like what was said or what happened that made him react like that?
No, and we didn't talk to him after the game because the other thing that happened, and the real bummer, is on that 2-minute drive, he gets a helmet to the knee or whatever it was, and it was weird because they didn't want to use a timeout, so he kind of just like rolled off the field, like Army rolled off the field, and so a lot of people I don't think even realized how significant the injury was, because in most cases you're watching on TV or even from the press box, and if there's a significant injury, they're going to stop the game, and you're going to be like, oh, it's Foster, and in that case, he rolled off the field. So I think most people just kind of moved on. The Saints were still running offense. The clock never stopped, but he was getting looked at on the sideline for a good 10, 15 minutes before I think they did air cast it up and then eventually carted him off. So it's just a reasonably significant knee injury. He was on crutches going back from the game. So anytime you're looking at a guy who's had a really strong season, for especially, in an ugly year like this, and has been kind of a team leader, emotional leader, to go down with a knee injury on the final drive of the final game, it sucks. That sucks.
Yeah, it's like the injury demons out there have one more fuck you for them. I mean, they really took every playmaker was taken away on offense this year, no doubt.
Yeah, and like you got contributions from guys you never expected contributions from, right?
Right.
Like MVS, Dante Pettis is a guy we're going to talk a little bit more about. Like, I think everyone talks about MVS because he had the big plays, and I understand why. I think Dante Pettis has been just as important in terms of like special teams contributor. He's had some really nice kick returns this year. He caught a touchdown in that game. He had if you go back to the Rams game, one of the reasons you had a chance in that Rams game was, MVS caught the touchdown, but Dante Pettis got the 2-point conversion right after that. He's made a few really nice plays. That first drive against the Commanders, it's Dante Pettis catching that first down to get that first drive going. He's just quietly been a guy. I do want to give him some credit because he's a guy who showed up mid-season. No one expected anything out of him. So I kind of put him and MVS in that same conversation. But when you get to an end of the season and you're like, oh, what are your high points? And you're like, well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire ran for 26 yards. That was nice. Dante Pettis caught a touchdown. Hey, man. It was just this season sucked, man.
It's hard to believe, forget tale of two halves. You can't even say tale of two seasons, though, just because we lived the dream for 2 weeks and then it was ripped from us. I don't know if we got that second line in Dallas. That was the big downfall. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs.
Yes.
Cam Jordan has been really going in on this subject, and Cam, it's just funny. We've talked to Cam so much over the last week alone. He talked on Thursday, he talked after the game, he talked again today. I kind of ran out of stuff to ask him. One of the things I did ask him was like, hey, why do you think none of the veteran players have asked out of this situation? Because that's the thing that I feel like from the outside looking in, everyone's gonna be like I've seen, oh, why would they even want to come back? This and that. Like, if these players want it out, they can get out. Like, they have ways to get out. Like, they can make this situation untenable. None of them have done that. Like, if you go and look at Tyreek Hill yesterday, it's a good example of like all a star player has to do is go and talk to one media member and raise a stink about like, guys, I don't like it here. And suddenly that entire situation goes up in flames. Like, you might work it out. Like, the Dolphins and Tyreek Hill might work it out. But suddenly that is the lead story all week long, is star player X is unhappy, wants out. And that is the entire news cycle. Have you seen a single Saints player do that this year? Mike Thomas is the best example of a guy who's really kind of like making it about that. But even then, it was like not really about him wanting out. It was about like, I don't like Derek Carr, get him out of here. Like, that was a very personal vendetta. And I just think it's interesting. That's like, okay, if you think that these players are so discontented, why hasn't that been happening? Why haven't you been hearing from those players? And Cam is a good example of a guy that like, hey, I wasn't getting playing time. He was angry all season long, but it wasn't, hey, get me out of here. It was, I want to play. Like, we're not playing well. I want to be out there. Alvin Kamara today talked about that as well. Like, he signed an extension. Like, people seem to think Alvin wants out the door and more than anybody. It's like, no,
I don't
he's
get that.
Literally signing a new contract to stay here longer. So I don't know. It's a weird dynamic of like, yeah, the season didn't go well. I don't necessarily buy like, oh, we were the best team in the NFL the first 2 weeks in the season. And we've heard that a lot, and like statistically, the numbers back that up. But like, I don't know. I don't think it can be all attributed to injuries when things go south that quickly, right? When things just fall off a cliff that precipitously. And, what I will say is like, people keep still trying to convince me that Derek Carr is the biggest issue with this team. Like, they will not stop. It is inevitable. If you have a conversation, it will end up being like, oh, but Derek Carr, though. And I'm just like, I guess, like, yeah, the contract is big, but it's a quarterback contract. Quarterback contracts are big if you want a quarterback with a name. And you look at the results, and it's like, you see 10 games with Derek Carr, you went 5-5. Now, is that good? Not really, but it's 5-5. It is what it is. You went 0-7 in the games he didn't start. That includes two quarterbacks. You gave one guy half a chance. You didn't give him a full chance. You gave him half a chance. You started Spencer Rattler 6 games. You went 0-6. And in 4 of those games, you did not have a chance in, right? In a couple of those games, you gave yourself a shot in. But were you even in contention down the stretch? Not really. So I don't know. Like, I think that there's a lot of issues with this team. And I just can't bring myself to be like, the biggest problem they have is like they have to pay Derek Carr next year. Because right now I look at it and say the only reason you won 5 games is because of Derek Carr.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if it's not Carr, what's the option?
Well, and this is a conversation I didn't want to have today, but we will have it. And it's like, I keep hearing from people who are supposedly Spencer Rattler fans that they want to get rid of Derek and let Spencer get in there and do whatever he does. And I'm just like, guys, if you're a Spencer Rattler fan, you don't want that, because you are asking for a 2-15 season where you throw this guy to the Wolves on a roster that is not ready to support a young quarterback. And it's like, guys don't come back from that. That's a sacrificial lamb play. That's we expect this guy to be bad enough that we can draft a quarterback and then never hear from number 18 again. Like, that's what that is. So I honestly don't buy that, like, oh, well, they should see what Spencer has. Like, no, I want to develop Spencer, because I actually do think that Spencer has a chance to be a starting quarterback down the line. He's not ready right now. And what we've seen over 6 games is he's not ready right now. He's not going to be ready in week 1 of next season. But you do want to have him go into the offseason, take the lessons he was able to get from these 6 games. And he is a much better quarterback in this game than he is in week 6. You can go back and watch the tape of both of those games. He is playing at a much higher level in this game than he was in that game. In that first half alone, like, that was one of the best halves of football I've seen a Saints quarterback play in a while. Now, you didn't pay it off in the end zone. That MVS catch, I still think it was a catch, but
that was crazy, right?
I mean, that was a great throw. Like, again, it's like you see the throws and you see, well, if that's Chris Olave, does he make that catch? Probably, right? And so you kind of have to pay it off like that. But I also don't think that he's necessarily going to be ready next year. And the idea that, well, we can't afford to do this one more time, I don't know. If you don't believe in Spencer, then sure. If you want to throw him to the Wolves and end his career that way, fine. But I don't see that as we're doing good by Spencer throwing him to the Wolves on a roster that can't support him.
Yeah, my thing too, we just talked about with, you re-signed Alvin Kamara. He's coming back. It makes no sense to not have a pro-ready quarterback. I don't, Spencer, like you said, I don't think he's ready for prime time yet. He needs some more grooming. But you see worthy developmental pieces there. But Carr's the guy. If you want to win right now, he's your dude. Like I said, other than that, who else you trying to bring in? Are you want like a Brett Favre? You want a Kirk Cousins? I'm just curious, because you're not drafting anybody right away and bringing him in either.
No, and there's no one to draft in this. You may end up with a quarterback. You may. Like, I don't know if a guy like Cam Ward maybe falls out of favor with some of these teams at the top of the draft and ends up falling somewhere. I don't know. You're in range where that could happen for you. I don't see it happening. It can't be the primary plan. And we'll get maybe this next episode we can really dive into like what restructures have to happen. I know that was a big piece of discourse this week in terms of what should happen with Derek Carr's contract, all that stuff. I think it's a little too much to get into today. But yeah, I mean, I think where people are mistaken is this idea that the Saints, while needing to make changes, are going to make changes geared toward we're not trying to win next year. Like you're not going to do that. This franchise is not going to be one that just accepts, hey, we're going to go 2-15 and figure it out in 2026.
Tank it for Arch.
They're not going to do that. I'm sorry. And, if that happens naturally, fine. But if if the decision you make ends up in the camp of like we have a 70% chance of winning 2 games, that's not the decision you're going to make. You're going to find another path. So it is what it is. There's going to be a lot to discuss. Like so much of this is going to come down to who the next coach is.
Right.
Darren Rizzi is going to be in that conversation. I think it's going to be a really tough sell. But he's going to get his chance to interview, and he's going to get his chance to make this argument. And that is what it is. But anything else you want to talk about in that game specifically before we move on?
What was it? Not the last touchdown, but the one before that for Tampa. I thought that the spot of the ball and the down and yardage was all messed up, and I never really got an explanation on what kind of happened. There was a 4th down. McMillan had like an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. And I don't know. I just felt like the spot and down, everything got messed up.
I don't think it did get messed up. I think so it was the first down, the down counts. So you're not counting that against the next down. It happened in between plays. It was a dead ball foul. So you're moving it back 15 yards, but it's still going to be 1st and 10. Where they got confused was because it was 1st and goal. So they had to make that change from 1st and goal. If it was like 1st and 10 from the 12, they would have moved it back 17 yards and said 1st and 10 from the 27. Where they got confused was 1st and goal, because you can't just add 10 yards to 1st and goal and say, so you had to have the actual yardage. And that's where it got mixed up. And they tried to figure that out. They got it right in the end. What was annoying is it took so much time. At the end of the day, it didn't matter because they scored on 1st and 18. Like they lost 10 yards on a holding penalty on the next down. And then they scored on 1st down. So even if it was 1st and goal from the 24, which is what they initially said, they would have scored a touchdown anyway. So I don't know. It was really all a do for nothing.
Yeah.
It's annoying because it took that long. And anytime you have refs talking in their earpiece and going this and that and this and that and this and that, you're going to be like, well, what's going on? This looks sketchy. This looks like they're just trying to figure something out. What's the spread and all that. And now it was just bad refereeing in general. Like they should know the rules in that instance, and they didn't. It was also a bad call, right? Like this whole well, he pointed like that and it kind of looks like a finger gun. Get the frick. Like, what are we doing? And the funny thing is Jalen McMillan talked about it after the game. The reason he did that was because his fingers were taped together, because he probably had a finger injury or something. And so he was just pointing for a 1st down, but because his fingers were taped together, he had to point with 2 fingers. So it looked like that. And he was just like, well, that was stupid, I guess. But it's like the fact that that's even something we have to talk about. Like, come on. Menacing gestures. Come on. Like, this is what we're worried about? Get out of here. The only positive thing from that game, and it ended up did not mattering because the Falcons lost anyway. But man, if you want to take a minute and feel better about things, just consider the fact that the Falcons were 6-3, dominating the NFC South. They were in control, man. They had it. 6-3. They walk into New Orleans. They walk into the Superdome, get embarrassed by Darren Rizzi's Saints, and then go into an absolute tailspin. They have not had a winning season since 2017. You were 6-3. You needed 3 more wins the rest of the gosh darn season to end that skid. They could not do it. The Falcons, at one point, 6-3, finished 8-9. They went 2-6 over their final 8 games. And that's how you extended your streak of non-winning seasons. The Saints have been terrible for the last 4 years. Even in that run, they have had 2 winning seasons. The Falcons haven't done it since 2017. how do you keep your fans engaged when anyway, I don't know. And the Panthers, they allowed the Panthers, what was it, 48, 40, 43 points, 44 points?
You saw Bryce Young throwing touchdowns and turning his back before it's even completed.
No
What's
look
going
touchdown
on?
passes. Oh man. Like, hey, if you can at least laugh at the Falcons' misery, it could be worse, right? And so that's it.
No, that's definitely something positive from Week 18 too, is seeing the Dirty Birds' monumental collapse as well. But maybe they got too many Saints ties over there, so they were jinxed too. Who knows?
I don't know, man. I don't know. But either way, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about, okay, what are the expiring contracts, the expiring free agents, and what do you do with them? Who comes back? Who do you think should come back? Who do you think should just be kind of shown the door? We'll talk about all that. Get into a quick mailbag in the final segment. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller, coming at you after the Saints lost 27-19 to the Bucs. The Bucs, 4-time division champs in a row. Not what you want to say, but it is what it is, and we'll do it. Stick around. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold, the first of our off-season podcasts. Man, you know, a lot of the comments, or at least a handful of the comments, are like, "I'm just glad the season's over." And man, I'm right there with you. These last 3 weeks have been a slog. It's like the last 3 weeks reminded me of, you know, so we went to California, and I think anyone who was out in California would agree that it was a good trip. The length of the time out in California was a good trip, except, and the only reason you were out there for the final week that you were going to be out there was because you were supposed to have joint practices with the 49ers. That's how this season started. And then the 49ers canceled the joint practices. And I think if you had known that you weren't having joint practice, you would have come home after Arizona. And the reason I say this is because that final week out there was just such a waste of everyone's time that it kind of left a black mark on everything. Like, it was just like, why are we here? This is stupid. Like, why are we even doing this? And then they went to San Francisco, played that game, came back. If they had to do it over again, I imagine they would have just come back after Arizona. And this final 3 weeks really felt like that final week out in California. It was like, can we just end it? Like, why are we doing this? Who's gaining from this? This is terrible. And yeah, like that, I can't agree with that sentiment more. Like, just, God, mercifully, this season is over. Everything about this year from week 3 on was just slow torture. It really was for everyone involved. And you had a couple weeks there where you're like, oh, this is getting a little better. And then it fell off a cliff. And man, I'm just like, we're now at the point where we can at least start to fix some of these problems. And that'll be, if nothing else, like some catharsis of, okay, we're getting a new coach in the building. There's some hope for the future. The last 8 weeks, even as much as I like Riz, I really do like Riz. Like, I feel bad because in interim situations, you're in a tough spot because you're in an interim situation because things were going so poorly that you had to fire the coach. And then, like, the best you can do is let it not go off the rails. And that's what he did. But it's just tough to sell that. But either way, man, it's over. I never want to relive this season ever again.
The tough part for me, too, is the fact I thought the team was a lot better than they were overall. And it just seems like a much heavier load to lift in this rebuild that they have to do right now, just because I feel like there's so many positions that need to be addressed that you're lacking in, whether it's starters or depth. They need a big rework here on this roster.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the one positive, or there's some positives, but like one of the positives that you could take in the negative is like what this season did do was lay bare a lot of the issues that have been existing that may have been being covered up by the fact that Demario Davis and Cam Jordan and these veterans are pulling more of their weight than is probably what you would want in terms of, I see a lot of people talking about the fact that the defense is too old. And I understand why they say that. But my issue is not that the defense is too old, because the older players on the defense are actually the ones that are playing better. The issue is not that the players like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu are old. It's that the young players are not playing at a level that is forcing them off the field. Right? Now, you could say like, hey, where's Zach Vaughn at? Right? Like, why wasn't he able to do that? I don't know. But either way, like, if you want to move on from a Cam Jordan or a Tyrann Mathieu or a Demario Davis, I need a young player to show up and supplant them, and they haven't done that. And so, like, to me, it's not an old player issue; it's a young player issue. Because who's playing? Jordan Howden, I don't think he took a step this year. I think he had one of the more disappointing seasons in terms of guys who had an opportunity and did not deliver. Like Chase Young, Carl Granderson, you tried to take over that spot from Cam, but they weren't delivering either. So that's why you put Cam back on the field. And Cam actually had 3-4 sacks over the final 8 weeks of the season. So I see it as a young player issue more so than an old player issue. And that's where it's like, no, I need to bring in more quality young players. You've tried to bring in quality young players. They just haven't developed, and you haven't developed them, except for the ones that you let go, and then they're starring somewhere else. Zach Bond might be the defensive player of the year. So I don't know. And I do think that, you do run into an issue with some of these older players where, and the Giants had this happen with Eli Manning, is these guys never get hurt. So at what point do you just say like, well, we don't want to play you anymore? Like, a lot of times injuries make the decision for you. In this case with Cam and Demario and even Tyrann, like they continue to stay healthy. So how do you just replace them? But either way, like what this season has done is force you to kind of confront that conversation in ways that you haven't had to previously, in ways that a 9-8 season does not force you to do.
With defense, I feel like you got to get younger. Definitely. I mean, that's something they got to get younger though. To me, it's the D line, not even the edges. I have a problem with it. Just it's been the interior, not getting much out of either one of the guys you have in there right now. I just feel like, I don't know. I can't get past the run defense this year being so abysmal, and we used to see that front be so damn stout and being able to, contain running backs. Quarterbacks, I think were, mobile quarterbacks at least have been an issue. Maybe they are for most teams, but I don't know. Just they got gashed by the run game this year, and I just think that that D line just it failed you on so many ways there.
Yeah, but I don't even know if it's getting younger. It's adding talented players. Like, I don't care what age.
Right. If it's a free agent that can do it, sure.
Right. I just need those players to produce. They don't have to be a rookie. I just need them to be a quality player. And I do think Colin Saunders has been a solid addition for this team. I don't think Nathan Shepard has really gotten the job done in that. But Brian Brzee, you spent a first round pick on a defensive tackle, but he's not helping you in the run game.
No.
So I think that's where it becomes difficult. And it's hard to find those kind of blue chip defensive tackles if you're not drafting in the top half of the draft.
That's why I guess I'm thinking young there, because it's hard to especially for this team right now, what they're going through with the cap and this whole rebuild. I don't know if you're going to attract that name and want to spend that price on a D lineman right now.
No, and those two kids from Michigan are going to be my top targets. Like, I want a defensive tackle in the top 10. We're drafted number 9. It's the highest you've drafted since 2008 when you traded up to draft Cedric Ellis. It's the highest pick you've gotten in general since 2006 when you took Reggie Bush at number 2 overall. But let's just kind of segue from there into, okay, defense, expiring contracts. Who are the players that are kind of like, okay, bringing them back, letting them go, TBD? We're not seeing the whole thing here. So hold on one second. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. So this is not the entire list. I'm only really talking about the guys on expiring deals, not exclusive rights free agents, guys like that. But so you start off, there's 3 defensive ends there, and I'll just run through the list right now, and then we'll kind of go back to it. So you have defensive end Tano Passanio, defensive end Peyton Turner, defensive end Chase Young, linebacker Willie Gay Jr., safety Will Harris, defensive back, cornerback, whatever you want to call him, Ugo Amadi, and then Paulson Adebo, who spent the second half of the season, or since week 7, really, on injured reserve, coming back from a broken femur. I actually did see him today. He's in good spirits. He came back to kind of pack up his locker, really. Pick up his Christmas present from Joe Woods, that sort of thing. But all right, so let's start off with the defensive end. So Tano Passanio, Peyton Turner, Chase Young. What are your reads on those guys? Do you want to see those guys brought back?
Definitely interested in what Chase Young's market's going to be. And with Peyton Turner, man, it's tough. He spent most of this year healthy, and you want to – I'd hate to give up on a guy you've been developing and then see him go somewhere else and thrive, a la Trey Hendrickson. And I'm not putting Peyton Turner in that category, but I'm curious what he's going to fetch on the open market too, because I'd still be interested in retaining him. But I know Passanio's up in age. I'm pretty sure, though, that the team and the current coaching staff at least like him, or they would have gotten rid of him while he was nursing that injury.
No, I mean, he's a work ethic guy. He's a good locker room guy. So,
he's not
it's
breaking
going to
the
be
bank.
interesting. I'm sorry.
He's not breaking the bank.
No, and that's going to be where you're at, because it's going to be, whoever takes over the defense next year is going to have to kind of, from a scheme perspective, figure out what they want to do. And you're going to have to build to some extent with guys on veteran minimum deals. And so Atano is a guy that if you can get him back on a vet minimum deal, sure, why not? Like, there's just going to be bodies that you need to bring in. That said, like, I think your numbers are fine, because you are going to still have Carl Granderson, right? You are still going to have Isaiah Foskey, a guy who, may or may not play more than 3 snaps a game for the rest of his career. I don't know. I can't say for certain. I'm looking up right now. I meant to check this morning exactly how many defensive snaps he got in the game. I don't know if he played any, but I wasn't really watching him all that closely. He did not. Isaiah Foskey, if I had any illusions that me griping at the coaches and saying, this and this and this had any impact whatsoever in their decision making, I've been disillusioned, because I spent all week asking, like, Joe Woods, Darren Rizzi, he's like, why the frig won't you play Isaiah goddamn Foskey? Like, I went on the radio multiple times, like, play Isaiah Foskey, please. After 4 weeks of getting defensive snaps of being in the rotation, he had averaged 10 per game over the last 2 weeks. Got a bagel in that game, a game that you couldn't really do anything defensively. You couldn't get after Baker Mayfield, really. You couldn't do anything, and he didn't get a single snap. So I don't know. I don't friggin' know. But either way, he's going to be on the roster. So, Cam Jordan is still under contract. We'll have to wait and see. It's a conversation I want to have when we get into the kind of the restructures episode. Yeah. But that's going to be one. So that's where I land. It's like, do you need another body in Tano Passanio? Do you draft a defensive end, right? And in that case, like, I move on from him. But Peyton Turner, Chase Young, 2 interesting guys. One of the fun, funny is not a word, but like, Peyton Turner, I talked to him today because, one of the things I appreciated this year, and I've been trying to not bring it up throughout the course of the season because I didn't want to jinx the guy, is, he played in 16 games, but in 16 to 17 games. And the mistake would be to look at that and say, well, he was finally fully healthy. He didn't deal with any injuries all season. No, he did. He played through injuries. He played hurt a lot of the season. But I mean, that's what you have to do as an NFL player, right? Like, the idea that Cam Jordan has played in all these games because he's been healthy, it's like, no, he just plays hurt a lot. And that's what Peyton did this year. I think he deserves credit for that. Now, he would have loved to have been a bigger part of the rotation. He would have loved to have a bigger pass rush role, but getting on the field for 16 games, and it's just tough. And it's just kind of like life at the NFL level. One thing that most people probably don't know about Peyton is he actually had offseason back surgery. And it's kind of the most Peyton Turner story you could tell is he hurt his foot in week 1 of last year. As he was rehabbing from that injury, he actually had a herniated disc in his back. And so he played in week 18. And then the offseason, he had to have back surgery. So he actually hurt himself while he was hurt. And I don't know, like, what are you going to get him back for? Is the injury history just too much?
Right.
And I don't know, but it's not going to cost you a ton to bring him back. So I don't know. He's kind of a TBD for me because I think Chase Young is the bigger question. And I would be, I know some people are down on Chase Young. I would be willing to bring Chase Young back. I think Chase Young was fine this year. I would have liked to see more, but I do think he was an impact player for you. And he's a guy that I'd like to keep developing, right? He's 25 years old. Like he's not like a guy past his prime. He's entering his prime. And, one of the things I said in this season earlier was like, I don't know if you're going to be able to afford Chase Young going into next season if he has this monster year. He didn't have a monster year. You probably can't afford him. You might be able to bring him back from effectively the same deal that you got him on this year. And if that's the case, I'm bringing him back. I'm not breaking the bank to bring him back. I'm not getting into a bidding war to bring him back. But I have no issue bringing back a Chase Young because I need impact players on the edges, and I just don't feel like you have enough of them.
Yeah, the only unfortunate thing for me with Chase, I would bring him back too, just because he is young and you've seen that pass rush ability, but man, he's not great against the run either.
No, and it's more of a discipline thing than because he's the one thing. If I'm Chase Young, I'm annoyed in that game because there was a play, one of his best run defense plays of the season. He chased down I think it was Bucky Irving. He chased him down from behind, took him down for a loss. But the Bucs had a holding penalty on that play, and the Saints decided to take the penalty rather to push him back to 1st and 20 rather than 2nd and 11 or 2nd and 12. Well, the Bucs have a 10-yard pass play on that next snap, so they end up in 2nd and 10. So you lost a yard and a half in the exchange, and Chase Young, kind of gets screwed out of a tackle for loss. Those stats matter for these guys. You don't get a ton of stats as a defensive end, and that's one of the more important ones. But no, you're right. He hasn't been good enough against the run, but it's not a physical thing. And that's where I look at it and say, coaching has been a massive issue for the Saints defense in general. I don't think Todd Grantham was a good choice for a defensive line coach. I don't think Joe Woods has been a particularly helpful piece for this defense as the full-fledged defensive coordinator, but I can't teach what he's able to do. I can teach him what he has to do and how he can be better against the run and that sort of thing. So, and people are going to be saying this about Chase Young his whole career because he just is that dominant of an athlete. So what people have been saying about Jadeveon Clowney his whole career. But I don't know. Impact players are hard to find, so I'm sticking with them. Let's go down this list further. Willie Gay, Will Harris. What do you read on those guys?
Willie's another guy I think is fairly young. Didn't really stand out too much this season though, but I'd be willing to keep him around just because you really don't have many bodies at the linebacker position. The other Will Harris, I could do without, honestly. He really did nothing for me at the safety slot.
I'm actually opposite. I actually think Willie Gay has been a little bit disappointing in terms of I just don't know if he did what you needed him to do at that position. Like, I don't think he did what you brought him in to do. The funniest thing about Willie Gay is how much he hates the Chiefs right now. He's gone off in the locker room a couple times when the Chiefs have been on him. Like, I'd rather watch Polar Express. But and then that's not making that up. He changed the Chiefs game to Polar Express. But no, I think you can refine a linebacker and you can replace a linebacker. I don't think that you have a lot in the secondary at all at the safety position. I actually think
no, definitely not.
Will Harris has been when he's been out there, I think he's been kind of a tone setter for you. And he's, a guy who was willing to come up and lay the wood on people. And I need that at the linebacker or at the safety position, which your safety has the safety position and the linebacker position at times they're just interchangeable. So he's kind of just strikes me as kind of a bigger bodied safety who can hit. I would actually, like I said, I would bring back Will and let Willie Gay walk because, I have young linebackers. Like I have young athletic linebackers who can chase a guy down. I don't need a veteran to do that. Again, I got young guys under contract. Like if I'd rather just put Anthony Orji on the field and figure out what I have there. Okay, two more: Ugo Amadi, Paulson Adebo.
Both are a yes for me. I like Ugo in a limited role. You don't want to use him as a starter. And for Paulson, what's his price going to be? I don't think too high now coming back from an injury. So I think that's doable.
I agree. I think Ugo is a training camp body, and maybe you do the same thing with him next year as you did this year in terms of, okay, start him on the practice squad. If you need him, you can call him up. Kind of like Jonathan Abram this year. So, but people are going to be hard on Ugo because he had a couple rough games here. He's not a starter. He's a good depth player, and you're asking him to do too much right now. But I still think Ugo is a guy that we should all appreciate for what he's done this year. Paulson Adebo, I agree. With Marshawn Lattimore gone, if I don't bring in a top end cornerback in the draft, if I don't spend a premium asset on that, and I'm not going to be in the market to go out and pay top dollar at the cornerback position, I am re-signing Paulson Adebo at whatever the market rate is. I'm not going to try to lowball him, but I am going to say, hey, you can go out and test the market and come back to us, and whatever the market, and this is what people got mad about with the Giants, because this is exactly what Joe Shane said to Saquon Barkley. And he went out and he was just like, hey, I'm going to sign with the Eagles. But I don't think that's it. People are like, oh, that's so disrespectful. I don't think it's disrespectful. I think it's just like, hey, we're not going to, we can't tell you what you're worth. The market is going to tell you what you're worth. And we would like to do business with you, but we're not going to bid against ourselves here. So if you want to go out and see what the offers are out there and then come back to us, and if we can do better, we'll do better. If we can't, then you go take that offer. Like, I think that's the most sensible way to approach that situation. But I do want Paulson back. And we'll see. The question is going to be, do you continue to play this man-to-man heavy scheme on defense, or do you kind of adjust to more of a zone defensive scheme? And if that's the case, then maybe you don't bring him back because he is a man-to-man kind of cover corner, and that those skill sets are different. But yeah, I agree with you.
No, I guess that's why it's going to be pretty imperative, I think, to get the head coach and then whatever staff that coach wants set in place, so you do know what steps to take with some of these guys that, who's to say that whatever coach coming in or defensive coordinator has no interest in a Peyton Turner, then it doesn't make, I just picked that name out of the hat there. But what, it depends on what your head coach or the assistant are going to want to roster wise.
No, it's an important question. And that's why, people are going to want to say, hey, what's the best path to take with Derek Carr right now? And I just don't think that you have a path. Like, I don't think that you can take a path because the path doesn't exist. Like, until you have the head coach and the head coach says like, hey, I want this quarterback. I want this quarterback. Like, that's something that the head coach is going to be able to tell you, but that's not something you're going to be able to decide until you know the head coach. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. We can go through this quickly because I don't think the conversations are as significant here. So tight end Jawan Johnson. I'd personally like Jawan back, and I just because he's a guy. He was your leading receiver this year, right? So I don't know. It's frustrating because he just feels like a guy who can impact games more than he does or has. But there are times this season where he feels like the only guy who can actually go make a play for you. So I don't know. I'm bringing him back. I think he's a good team locker room guy. And especially if Foster Moreau's injury is significant to the point that he's in question to start next season, then you need someone who knows, I guess I could say knows the offense, who knows what the offense will be, but you need somebody.
Yeah, you could probably say this for a lot of positions, but man, you just don't have much at tight end. And it's hard to think about the room without a guy like Jawan around. Even if you're going free agency or draft, I feel like you still need you need Juwan around, I feel like, for next year.
Yeah, he helps the equipment staff clean up the locker rooms after the game. I mean,
Added bonus.
yeah, I mean, come on, you're not gonna get that out of anybody. That's a joke, but also true. Like he actually does, and I say that jokingly, but it is kind of an indicative of Juwan's personality. Like he is that type of guy, and it's easier to sell that when you have that type of kind of servant leader personality of like, no, these guys need help. I'm going to help them out. I'm going to put on the plastic gloves and pick up, tape wads. And, most fans probably would just roll their eyes at that. But I do think, just being that type of person is helpful in this conversation. The next three are interesting because it's Shane Lemieux, Oli Udoh, Landon Young. All three guys play multiple positions. All three guys are backups on the offensive line who have started multiple games this year. Do you have an opinion on any of those guys?
I guess I'd be willing to keep around Lemieux and Young. Udoh, I could let him walk, but you're still looking for more depth and so much more on the offensive line still. But I feel like, with the issues we've had with McCoy getting banged up, if that happens to be the case, I thought Lemieux's done a decent job at being, in that role as a backup to him. And then Landon Young, I just feel like the Saints team they like him and keep him around and want to develop the guy.
Yeah, it's funny as I was, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, and then you said it like, Landon Young is a guy that I like personally. Like I talked to him in the locker room a lot. He's very friendly. He's a hard worker. He does what's asked of him, but I just don't think the ceiling is very high. And so like, I kind of think it's a situation where, another one of these guys that, okay, maybe you bring him in for camp and you see what happens. You could say, hey, he knows the offense. So if you stick with a Clint Kubiak, I think you may bring him back. If you move on and you bring in a whole new offense, he's kind of just a guy. And as much as I hate to say that, that's what he is. Shane Lemieux, I actually think, has been a valuable piece for this team. The injuries are a problem. He got injured with the Giants his whole career. He got injured this year. I don't think his ankle injury was mega significant. I think it was one of those, well, you could be back in 2 weeks, but we're going to put you on IR because we can. And that's, I wouldn't exactly put it past DA to do that. I think he's been, he stepped in at a position he never played before. He's a center, or he played guard his whole career. Then suddenly it's like, hey, can you play center? I'm like, yeah, I can play center. And he did. And he started multiple games and wasn't a huge problem. I think he was just as serviceable as Connor McGovern when he was in there, a guy who played center his whole career. So I think Shane Lemieux, if I had to pick one of those three guys who is most likely to come back, it would be Shane. Just because, again, it's like you need guys who can play multiple positions, but I think their guard center is more valuable than guard tackle, if that makes sense. Because I have enough tackles. I need guys who can play either guard spot and center, because I'm not going to ask my tackles to play multiple positions.
I think we saw, though, this year, Eric McCoy gets injured and the whole season's going to hell anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if Eric McCoy goes down, you're done.
You're done.
Fullback Adam Prentice, I feel like we can just kind of move past this one. Like, I don't know if anyone has any hardline takes about Adam Prentice. You do want a fullback, so they brought in Xander Horvath in training camp. Adam beat him out. So
yeah, I'm sure that'll be something where you probably do bring Prentice back, and you have another person you bring in a camp as well to see who survives the fullback battle. But yeah, I don't feel any strong way for or against him. A guy that's been around the block though with this team.
Right. And then, okay, the last two, wide receiver Dante Pettis, wide receiver Marquez Valdez Scantling, Mr. MVS himself. Personally, I'd be okay bringing both these guys back.
I agree. Yeah, it's like I wouldn't mind seeing both of them back in the mix. The thing with, Scantling, does he still have a role when you do have like a guy like Shaheed back?
It's a good question. What MVS has that neither of those two guys has is legit size. Now Chris Olave and Rashid aren't small. They're not like Deontay Hardy, but MVS is a legit 6'4", and I think that's a weapon for you. And you have a veteran player who wants to be here. He likes it here. he's enjoyed his time here. It's obviously hasn't gone the way he had hoped, but I do think that he chose to come here, and I think he's been productive, and in instances where you are without those two guys, and when you are relying on kind of slighter frame, speedy receivers, you just have to bake in the fact that these guys are going to get dinged up. It's inevitable. You're playing in the NFL. Like, you're going to take hits and you're going to get hurt. And, with Olave, obviously the head injuries come into play. So I think having a guy who can kind of simulate a good bit of that, and you thought Mason Tipton was going to be that, he really wasn't, is valuable. So, and Dante Pettis obviously has the return upside. And I think you saw this year, like, the Saints were trying to take a little bit off of Rashid's plate with some of the return platoons that they had back there. So, no, I mean, I think both of those guys deserve a lot of credit for what they were able to do coming in midseason. And, both guys caught touchdowns. Both guys made big plays. Dante Pettis, if you recall, game against the Browns, that was a 14-14 game. And then he rips off a long punt return to set up a go-ahead touchdown. I think that was right before Taysom Hill's touchdown. So he's made an impact. And, it's guys off the street typically aren't going to come in and make an impact. So, yeah, I think those guys deserve some credit. And they would be the last two of like, okay, let's see if you can bring them in on a vet minimum deal and see what they have. MVS might be a little more expensive because I think he's probably made some waves in terms of, when you're scoring 80-yard touchdowns, people are going to take notice. So maybe he ends up outside of the Saints price range if they are trying to be cheap at the wide receiver position, which I imagine they will. So that's the only thing with him.
Yeah, and when you mentioned with Pettis, obviously that's a big thing with him too, is just the special teams ability that he was so good at. So worthy of keeping him around, and he's not breaking the bank.
No, I agree, and yeah, that's it. That's those are the expiring deals. Not exactly an offseason where you're like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
we got to go break the bank to keep this guy. You extended Pete Werner before the season. That 2020 draft is not exactly blowing the doors off anybody. Peyton Turner was that first round pick in that draft.
Out of all of them, I think that maybe Chase Young gets a little more money somewhere else, and you end up losing him because of that. But that's the only one I kind of worry about, getting overpriced on.
The way I'll look at this is like, okay, does anyone on either of these lists get a multi-year deal?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Chase, maybe. Paulson Adebo, maybe. But even if I'm Paulson, I don't want to sign a multi-year deal. I want to sign a 1-year deal so I can rebuild that stock and go into free agency again.
Right.
I think it's more likely that no one does. And you're going from there. But all right. Let's wrap up this segment. We're going to come back. We're going to dive into some mailbag questions and get out of here. This is Inside Black and Gold. The season is over. Thank the little baby Jesus in the manger for ending this so mercifully.
We got still plenty though between coaching and draft and free agent. I mean, it never stops. You know that.
The season is over. The news is not.
No, right.
Like we've already got 3 head coaching candidates named today. Like that's only going to continue. We're going to hear more rumor. There's 5 head coaching vacancies right now. That would be the Jets, the Saints, the Jaguars, the Patriots, who it kind of seems like fired Gerard Mayo because they wanted him to lose and he won anyway. And cost him the number 1 overall pick. So,
and is it me, or it doesn't seem like Vrabel's just the perfect fit over there?
I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. But then you're just asking for a wrongful termination suit, right? So that's a whole other equation. And then the final one is the Bears right now.
Bears.
The interesting one's going to be Mike McCarthy, who is not technically fired, but his contract is up on January 14th. And the question is going to be, do the Cowboys want him back, but also does Mike McCarthy want to go back? So that could be a 6th head coaching vacancy. We'll have to wait and
I think it's the Bears that requested an interview with him, right?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go check.
I think they requested an interview with McCarthy. So yeah, that was a rumor. I also saw somebody connecting with the Saints that'd be a possibility.
No, I
McCarthy.
mean, I don't see why you wouldn't. Like, I know people would lose their shit if they hired Mike McCarthy, but I think Mike McCarthy's a good coach. And we'll see. But anyway, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. Mailbag, going to take a second, star a few of these comments, come back. Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone for listening. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. So it'll be our final season mailbag edition. We'll have more mailbag editions, don't worry. But this will be our final mailbag edition for the 2024 season. From here on out, it will be the off season. And so, we'll have a few comments, we'll have a few questions in here first. Jasser Judah 504 says Rattler 2025, like an election campaign. Fix the cap, draft an edge rusher. It's interesting because I do think that you have to make a decision this offseason, and that decision is going to be, okay, do you clean up? Which end of the cap do you clean up, right? Because we'll dive into the more specific numbers as we go, but like you're going to have the choice effectively of eating a massive cap hit for Derek Carr and just saying we're done with it, and moving on and saying, hey, we're going to start Rattler and we're going to throw him to the Wolves and he's going to be our sacrificial 2-15 lamb and we're going to pick number 1 overall and we're going to try to get Arch Manning. Like, you could do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that other than, okay, the problem is everyone wants that season until that season happens. And then it's like the entire way through, fire everybody, fire everybody, fire. Well, but you wanted this. So if this is what you wanted, then why, when it goes badly, are you then yelling to fire everybody? Because that's the plan you chose. That's what you wanted to happen. And now it's happening. Like, I heard for years, man, I wish the Saints were bad enough so that we could make changes. Well, we're making some changes, and now we're mad because they're bad. Anyway, so that's a question you have to answer. But like, you're not going to be able to cut Derek Carr, absorb that massive cap hit, and then also clean up the cap on the other end with the aging veteran players that everyone seems convinced are the issue and wants to move off of, right? So if you're going to try to cut Derek Carr, because you're not keeping Derek Carr on the roster and doing all that. You're either moving on from him completely or keeping him and playing him. And so, like, you could either do that. You could either keep him and play him and restructure that deal and move that cap hit forward and then avoid touching the contracts for Taysom Hill, Tyrann Mathieu, Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara. Or you could do the opposite. And you could move on from Derek Carr, but that would affect, maybe you can get away with one of those guys not touching their deals, but by and large, you're going to end up having to restructure the entire roster. And that includes Cam Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu, Taysom Hill, Demario Davis, Alvin Kamara. So it's like, which would you prefer? The Saints are probably going to rather go down the path that gives them the best chance to win games. And that path would be starting Derek Carr, cleaning up the cap around him so that you can go into 2026 with the cleanest cap table possible, independent of the quarterback. And then if you do want to move on from the quarterback in 2026, you can put him as a post June 1 cut and allow yourself cap flexibility so that you're eating a majority of that in 2027 when you will have a much cleaner cap table overall. To me, that's where I land. All that is to say, starting Rattler in 2025 and cutting Derek Carr will not mean that you don't have a dirty cap table in 2026. It'll just mean instead of the Carr money on the cap table, you have dead money from 4 different veteran players who you'll then be tied to for 2 more seasons.
I'm just curious too. You mentioned it, and I know a bunch of folks have been talking about doing the tank for Arch. We don't even know what the kid can do yet.
Well, I don't know if it's Arch specifically. Arch is just a fun name,
because of the Manning ties. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I think it's just generally speaking, okay, I want a quarterback.
You get those, promotional emails, and I get stuff, pushing Heisman odds for next year. And number 1 is Arch Manning. I'm like, how is that possible?
Have you watched him play? It's good. He can run, which is so bizarre for a Manning. Although, I say that's not true. It's bizarre because our brains are trained on Peyton and Eli, right? And to think of a Peyton and Eli running is weird. But if you go back and watch Archie play, like if you could, whatever highlight tapes you can find of Archie Manning, he was an athlete. He was one of the first true running quarterbacks, in part because he was running for his life, but also because he could do it, and he's Cooper's son, right? Remember that this is not a Peyton or Eli offspring. I hate using that word. But it's a Cooper line. And Cooper was a wide receiver. Think about that. He was that level of athlete. So that's where Arch is getting it from. So I don't know. I think Arch is going to be legit. I don't think, I think that the hype around the Manning name is going to be whatever. And that's part of it.
Already.
It's like Shedeur Sanders. I don't know. I've watched Shedeur Sanders play. Everyone's going to try to convince me that he's a top 5 pick. If his name was Shedeur Johnson, would he be a top 5 pick? I think he's just like the Ball family, right? Like everyone is convinced the Ball family was elite basketball prospects because of the brand. So we'll see. I don't hate Shedeur. I think Shedeur is a fine quarterback. We're talking about top 3 in the draft. And so we'll see. And I think that's what we're going to learn about Arch next year. But Arch is in the SEC. He's at Texas, so he won't be able to hide. That's been my question for Shedeur is I don't know if I've seen him against the top level competition that I need to see to have a strong assessment of just how good he is as a quarterback. Right? I've seen him dominate lesser competition in ways that star quarterbacks dominate lesser competition. How would he handle Alabama? How would he handle Georgia? I don't know. But either way, that's going to be the question is, should the Saints really tank? Now I could tell you going in, they're not going to, but should they? And that's what starting Spencer in week 1 would be leaning fully into that tank. And it would be miserable from start to finish, but I'm not going to say that I hate the idea because it probably won't be any more miserable than what we just watched.
Well, you would hope that he would have, some healthy wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends.
You'd hope. David Leroux says, just listen to Cam and Alvin's end of the year interviews and they give me hope for the future. Seems like they want to keep Rizzi. It's an interesting thing because Alvin, yes, very much so, was in Darren's corner from day one. Alvin was championing Darren Rizzi. Alvin was never really a DA guy. But I don't know how much they're going to go to bat for him in the whole conversation of desperately, this is not going to be a Raiders Antonio Pierce situation where the coaches are or the players are threatening to revolt if they don't hire Darren. I think the players really do like Darren Rizzi, and that's not in question. But is that enough to give a guy a job? I don't know.
It's interesting because I could see the franchise going, why not give Rizzi another year, on just a whole year, going to camp with him, running the show. I don't think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't hate the idea either, though.
It's going to be tough to sell to the fan base.
Right. That's the biggest thing. But from this rebuild we're talking about in the grand scheme of things, and if you want tankathon and you want to throw, Spencer Rattler out there, Rizzi as head coach, here comes number 1 pick in the draft, and then you start really fresh the year after.
Yeah, to me, it's like, okay, what are my candidates? And we talked about some of them. Like my issue with the field that we are seeing develop is, and this is exactly what I didn't want to happen, was like, why are we're interviewing a bunch of guys because they're connected to Sean Payton. Like, I hate that. I hate that so much. It drives me insane. Now Kellen Moore, I don't think he has the Sean Payton connection, so that's a little outside the box there. But David Shaw, he is a Sean Payton guy. Like, I don't even know how the Saints have any connection to him other than Sean. And like, you would draft Stanford guys because you had an in with David Shaw, and he could give you, like, you draft Andres Pete, and it's like, yeah, David Shaw gave him a glowing endorsement. Like, it's kind of strange. Joe Brady, like, again, okay, Aaron Glenn, it's a little different, but it's really not. Like, it's just a Sean Payton connection thing. Now, at least Aaron Glenn has the Saints connection in general, so you can say, like, we just know him really well. Like, and Joe Brady was here as well too, not for that long, but I don't know. Like, when I look at this coaching search, the one thing that's going to drive me nuts is the idea that Sean Payton, the ghost of Sean Payton, is hiring the next head coach.
Maybe you're trying to find the next Sean Payton, sure, but yeah, I don't want just his tree to be a reason you're reaching out to guys.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that completely. If you want to go and find your playbook for what brought you to Sean in the first place,
yeah,
do it. Absolutely. But like, I don't know. Like, I feel like this is something we watch happen over and over and over again. Like, these coaching tree things in general, if that's the only reason you're hiring someone, just don't seem to work. Like, look at all the failed Belichick assistants. I mean, like you can, there's so many. Not have any of them worked out? Vrabel's probably the most successful one, but even he's like, okay, was good, not great. Like guys like Romeo Crennel and Bill O'Brien and Josh McDaniels, and like the just working with a Hall of Fame head coach does not make you a Hall of Fame head coach. Like, what makes that guy a Hall of Fame head coach? Go find someone with those traits. Don't find someone who watched that guy and is trying to pretend to be him. And teams do that constantly, and it drives me nuts. And I think for a while teams started to get away from that because of all the failures around those coaching trees. Because for a while it was like, oh, the Parcells tree, everyone wanted to branch off the Parcells tree because that always worked. And then some of these other trees really kind of fell flat. But then now you're back to, oh, every Shanahan assistant seems to be working out, so why not just keep doing it again? I don't know.
Well, we've already had a taste of the Sean Payton tree. We need some new plants.
Yeah. Plant something new. That's a good way to put it.
Go, right.
Plant your own tree. Like, plant your own goddamn tree. Sean took he dug up the roots and went and took them with him. Like, that tree's in Denver. That's not our tree anymore. Buckman says Rattler 0-6. Excuses won't change that. Backup at most. I mean, 0-6. It's tough to look past 0-6. It really is. But I do think that you did see, if you put on that, it's funny because his season got bookended in terms of as a starter with the Bucs. Week 6 NFL debut, Bucs. Week 18 rookie season finale, Bucs. And I do think, like, it's funny because the first half of both those games, I think you saw the Saints put up points, but the way the Saints put up points in that Week 6 game versus the way that they executed offense in the Week 18 game, completely different. And so, I don't know what Spencer Rattler is going to be. I don't think we need to look at 0-6 and say, like, well, he can't possibly develop from 0-6. I mean, you look at some of the players that started terribly in their rookie seasons, like the Peyton Mannings and the Troy Aikmans and guys like that. Like, they developed. Now, they were number 1 overall picks, so they were definitely going to get the opportunities to develop, and that's the difference in terms of, hey, you may never see Spencer Rattler start another game if it doesn't go the way that a certain way.
Yeah, I won't condemn him to just being, a career backup right now, just because I'd like to see him play, with Olave, Shaheed, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara.
I mean, well, here's the thing: if you're drafting a guy in the 5th round, you're not expecting future Hall of Famer. Like,
Right.
so career backup in the 5th round is actually a success story. All that said, you'd hope for better. But it would be a lot easier to make that argument if he had gone out and won a few games this year. He hasn't done that. You've seen a guy that has the ability to make plays, but doesn't seem to have the ability to do it consistently.
You mentioned it too. There were some high throws, some wide ones. There was this in key moments too, which obviously makes it more stand out.
Yeah, and Josh Judas says 0-6 with wide receivers off the street, a patched up offensive line, and and that's true, right? Like, I would like to see, it's funny because the week 6 version of Spencer Rattler, when you had the weapons, I wish you had seen the week 18 version of Spencer Rattler in week 6 with the weapons, because by the time you got to week 18, you're like, well, let's see if MVS can make this catch. And no offense to MVS, but you're talking about MVS. Like, I would love to see Chris Olave get that ball over the shoulder and see what happens. And if you score a couple touchdowns in that first half, because you had 2 potential touchdowns to MVS that he couldn't finish off. And I don't think the issue was the throw. If you cash in 2 touchdowns there instead of field goals, that might be a different game. So, the weapons do matter. So I don't think you can hold that against the rookie in that sense of, like, would he be better with star receivers? Absolutely. Who wouldn't be?
It's just amusing to me too. Like, you see the chat too. There was, the Rattler, the snake den, whatever you wanted to call it. And now there's so much Rattler hate that it's like, why would we even have this guy on our team? It's amusing, just the dynamic of being a fan.
Yeah, it is. It's a wild place to be. Rubber Johnny says, yes, let Spencer go 1-16 and get a QB in the next round. It's also simple. Oh, gosh.
I don't think Alvin would like that.
No. Rubber Johnny says, Carr won't get this team to the playoffs, but he will make sure they don't get a top 10 pick. Pretty much the worst of both worlds. and I don't, I can't hate that take, because
no, I can't either. I can't completely bash that.
No, it's true. Like, how many wins, Bobby was talking about this, like, how many more wins does Derek add? Because he definitely adds wins over replacement level quarterback. Now, it's not 7, but it might be 4, right? And so if that's the difference between going 5-12 and 9-8, then yeah, all it's doing is actually delaying your ability to reset the deck. So I mean, I like, as toxic as he's trying to be there, like, I don't disagree with it, because it's true. Right. It's like, it does feel like, man, we're fighting to get to the middle, but we're not. There's no way we're getting past the middle.
Yeah, there's some folks that will even bring up, oh, if we had just lost those first 2 games instead of coming out hot, our draft pick would be so much better right now.
I mean, that's true, but I still would prefer to be a good team. Like, here's the thing, and there's a few comments. This is one. Saint for Life says, Saints are at minimum 2 years out from winning again, more likely 3 years out. Unfortunately, this team needs everything. It's going to take time. Hiring the right coach will be key. See, I agree with that last sentence. Hiring the right coach is important. And because I don't think that, yes, there is a lot of things that you need to fix.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you're as far away as this season made it look. You just have to hit on draft picks, first of all. And then you have to execute when you get opportunities to execute.
Hey, look at Washington. Look at Houston. What happened to them? And yeah, I know they got the stud new quarterback, but they were able to turn things around in a year.
Yeah, I mean, you can turn things around. And like, the idea that the Saints are that far off, no team is honestly that far off. If you get things going in the right direction, you move in the right direction. Now, are they far off from being a Super Bowl team? Absolutely. But the idea that they're 2 to 3 years away from being a playoff team, I think is wrong, because you can make changes in 1 year that impact you. You just have to make the right changes. Like, that's the thing.
We saw in the NFL this year, there's so much suckage in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at all the games the Saints lost by like less than a touchdown. Like, look at the Chiefs and like how close they are to being like a 5-12 team. Let alone like, but they're not. They win those close games. Now, the Saints don't win close games. That's something they don't do, and that's the difference between being a good team and a bad team. Now they know how to play close games. They know how to get into close games. They just don't close them out, and that's true on both sides of the ball. You know, there were 2 defensive stands in the final 2 minutes away from being 4-0 this year. Now 4-0, if you lose 7 games in a row after starting 4-0, you're still in trouble. Ask the Bears. The Bears were the hilarious part is the Bears won in week 18, but the Bears they started 4-2, then lost their next 10 games. Yes, they lost their next 10 games, and keep in mind they're 4-2, and they lose a game on a Hail Mary by Jaden Daniels, and then lose 9 more games in a row after that, and then when they have a chance to lose and not ruin their pick, find a way to win and actually hurt their own draft pick. So that's the league you're in, babe. That's the league you're in.
Yeah, think about folks over there. Everybody, they were a preseason hype of talking about, oh, the Bears making the playoffs. They're the only team in the division that did
it. Yeah, right. Everyone else in the division won 10+ games. What did the Packers end up with? 11 wins? The Vikings, the 14-2, right? So the Lions went 15-2, the Vikings went 14-3, and the Packers, maybe it was 12 wins.
Packers are 11-6.
11-6.
Yeah.
So the Seahawks, you know, it's something we talked about earlier this year when we were talking about playoff scenarios. The Seahawks are now the first team,
right,
since the NFL, since the NFL added a third wildcard team to win 10 games and not go to the playoffs.
Imagine that being us. Oh, we won 10 games. We're still out the freaking playoffs.
This absolutely would have been that year. Like if they had won 10 games, they would have still missed it. Although they would have won the division. So, although, yeah, I guess because the Bucs went 10-7, right?
Yeah, they went 10-7.
I don't know. Michael Mitchell says, I say take the cap hit and move on from the top 2. I'm not sure who we're talking about.
Move on from the top 2?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll move on. Bad Fuaga. I'm not sure. A lot of these comments I think they're responding to some of these other ones. Top 10 players: Alvin Kamara, Derek Carr, Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau, MVS, Rashid, Demario Davis, Warner, Taylor, Harris, Groupie. Not a great list, but need to release the worst 20 players and build from there. So this is what they're talking about.
Okay.
You're not releasing Alvin, so I don't know. That was kind of a weird thing. If you're going to release Alvin, you wouldn't have re-signed him. You could just let him go. But one guy at the end of that list, which I appreciate they included Blake Groupie on there, because I don't know, like Blake went into this season, you know, and I think a lot of people were like, whatever. I think he had a really good year. All things considered. Like I think he just went out there and made the kicks they asked him to kick. Now, they didn't ask him to make any stressful kicks. Nothing he can do about that. But he did go 27-31 overall. That's 87.1%. I would have loved it to be a little higher, but whatever. It's up there where you need it to be. He was in the low 80s last year. So, you know, getting closer to 90, I think is what you want. Point after 31-33. Only one of those was a miss. He got one blocked against the Cowboys. Missed one against the Chiefs. 94%. It's where you want it. And it's like, okay, it's a 33-yard kick. So, you know, you're going to miss a couple of them over the course of years. 50 plus, 6 of 8, long of 57, 40-49, he went 7 of 8, 30-39, 10 of 11, 20-29, 4 of 4. Really strong, you know, season for him. And this was another example of a game that if you had gotten into kicking territory, you would have been like, whoa, we finally have a chance for Blake to make a clutch kick. Because you have not asked him to do it since week 3 of last year.
That's where I was going to go. I feel like he needs that moment because of week 3 last year. And he got into the ill favor of Saints fans after that and needs to redeem himself in some kind of way. And yeah, because like you said, his season hasn't been bad, but not everybody. There's a lot of folks calling for his head, and it's like, wait a minute, he's not the problem either.
No, I mean, he's had a great season. Like one of those 4 misses was in New York from 60 and got blocked. So
Right.
that's hard to hold that one against him. The only other miss from 50 plus was also in New York. It's a tough place to kick outdoors. He's the first Saints kicker in NFL history to hit 6 50-yard kicks in a season, and he was also the first Saints kicker in NFL history to hit 5 50-yard kicks in a season. So he's doing stuff that like no one else has done before in a Saints uniform, and when you can say that about yourself, it's pretty good. Now, one other thing to mention is Charlie Smith did get re-signed to a futures deal today, so he will be here next year, and you'll have that kicker competition. And I'm sure we'll have the same conversation next year of like, those 65-yarders sure are swell. But like the idea that Blake doesn't have a cannon of a leg is wrong. I mean, like if you can make a 57-yarder, you're in good company, right? And I watched him in pregame warmups knock one through from 63 outside, indeed pretty decent wind on Sunday. Like he can make those kicks. Now, I'm pretty sure Charlie can make a kick from 70. I actually talked to him about that today. I was like, what's the furthest you've ever kicked one from? And he said he hasn't really tried one in an actual like practice from beyond 65, but he's made one from 70, like in like just kind of messing around workouts. Like he's got a ridiculous leg. It's stupid what he can do.
What was the one we saw at Tulane that one night when he hit it?
65.
65. Okay.
But the thing is, like, he makes it from 65. Like Blake makes it from 63, and it's like, wow, went in. You know, like, it didn't go far.
Yeah.
It didn't get over a lot, but he made it, right? Charlie will hit from 65, and it'll like go halfway up the kicking net. Stupid. It's stupid. And I don't know. It's going to be tough, you know, because that's why I thought, like, hey, it would have been nice to get Charlie in there and let him make a kick. Because the hard part's going to be, hey, you want to commit to a kicker that's never made a kick in an NFL game? Well, I don't know. That's tough. But
I see some criticism with the punter with Hayball. I was surprised to find out, though, that he was actually pretty darn good getting punts inside the 20.
I hate that stat. I hate that stat so much. Because it's like, well, what is a punt to the 19 do for you? like yes, he did. I think he led the NFL in kicks inside the 20.
Maybe
but
that
you know, when I was
like, wow, I didn't realize it was that good. Because to me, I feel like they did need a new punter too.
But they punt constantly from near the 50-yard line, so you're going to have a lot of those kicks. Now, where did he rank in kicks inside the 10? I don't know, because the NFL, for some absurd reason, doesn't track that stat. And that's the actual game-changing kicks that I want. I don't need a punt to the 17. I want a punt to the 7. But the NFL doesn't track that for some dumb reason. But when I looked it up this year, and he's been better over the last 4 or 5 games in terms of, I've seen him punt. When I looked it up initially, he had not had a single punt downed inside the 5. He's had at least 2 since I did that downed inside the 5. He's had a handful inside the 10. Against the Raiders in particular, he had some monster kicks in that game. And my only question is, like, why sometimes does he have that like 58, 60-yard range, and other times it's like, man, that's a 37-yard net kick. But I don't think he's been bad. He's a rookie. So, you know, you got to give him some grace there. But you know, I don't know if people have been mad about it, but I don't think he's been a problem.
Everything gets magnified when you start nitpicking. Well, not nitpicking, but you're picking apart the punter's game.
Picking apart the punter. That's a good alliteration.
Boom, boom, boom. There you go. Right.
Anyway. All right. Anything else you wanna do before we move on?
No, I guess after this episode, we should cue the dramatic music and enter Coach Watch.
Coach Watch. Coach Watch. Sounds like a brand. It sounds like a fancy watch you would buy at like Macy's.
Introducing the new Coach Watch
by Roger Federer. No,
But then,
messy. That'd
we
be a
talked a
messy
lot,
product.
some issue, things with the roster. Who do you bring back? Who do you not? I think, that's the key piece. Number one right there is who's the dude making the calls at head coach, and then what's his staff looking like? Is there a chance on offense that you keep around a guy like Kubiak? I think on defense we've kind of hashed it out. You're not going to be retaining Joe Woods here.
God, I hope not.
But yeah, and there's still criticism. A lot of folks with Kubiak they have now, but if we're going to stick with Derek and run this, back with him again, why not give another go at Kubiak if your coach is a defensive mind, I guess.
Yeah, it all comes down to the head coach. It really does. Right? Like, because if the head coach you bring in is like, no.
Aaron Glenn and Clint Kubiak.
Yeah. And there's been some reporting that the decision's already been made. The decision hasn't been made. Come on. Like, I hate that. That's so stupid. Now you can have a favorite. You can have a guy you like more than others. But you're doing interviews. You're doing this whole process. And the Saints, I guarantee you, are going to go so slow in this process, it's going to drive you up the wall. They have not made a decision.
I feel like it's when, the Patriots fire their coach, and immediately to me, it was like, oh my God, Vrabel's the guy. And I think a lot of folks feel that way about with Glenn in this role.
I'm just telling you, if they hire Vrabel, I would bet Gerard Mayo files a lawsuit. Because you're not allowed to, you can't just do that. You can't just fire a guy because you like a guy who's not your guy better, and just you have a contract. They won more games this year than the Patriots did last year. You stuck a guy with a terrible roster and a rookie quarterback, and then it's that didn't go well. Yeah, go to hell. Of course it didn't go well. You thought it was going to go well? What are you talking about?
At least the Pats do seem like they have a dude at QB they can build off of.
Yeah, right. And now a different coach is going to get
a different coach, right?
Didn't have to deal with that live grenade. You handed Gerard Mayo a live grenade, and then you fired him because it blew up. Anyway, they're cutting a basketball player because he got a turnover at the end of a shot clock because you handed him the ball with 3 seconds. Anyway, moving on. That's it. That's going to be this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. It's been a long one. Didn't intend for it to go this long. It's been a weird day. It's been a weird week. It's been a weird year. I feel like I say that a lot. But that's it. This is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone for hanging out. All the questions, all the comments, as always. We'll be back. Should be back later in the week, probably on Thursday. And do kind of a more in-depth, off-season plan podcast, break down a lot more of what was talked about today. Darren Rizzi, Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, all these guys. But till then,
Jeff, when you're covering the Saints, it's always weird. Who dat, folks?
That's true. Playoffs.
Termites.